The judge looked at the woman sitting alone at the respondent's table and asked, in a tone that made no effort to hide its impatience, "Mrs. Okonkwo, are you still proceeding without legal counsel?" The courtroom did not snicker. It was worse than that. It went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when everyone has already decided the outcome and is simply waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. Her ex-husband, Preston Weil, leaned over to his lawyer and said something behind his hand. His lawyer, a man named De Hartwell who charged $900 an hour and dressed like he knew it, smiled without looking up from his notes. In the row directly behind Preston sat his girlfriend, a woman named Cassidy who had arrived wearing a white blazer to a divorce proceeding, which told you everything you needed to know about her confidence level. Adora Okonkwo sat very still at her table. She had a single yellow notepad in front of her and a pen she had taken from the hotel room where she'd been sleeping for the past 3 weeks. She was wearing a gray blazer she'd bought at a Value Village on Dundas Street for $14. Her hair was pulled back, no jewelry, no laptop, no legal team fanned out beside her like a hand of cards, to anyone watching. And people were watching. She looked like a woman who had already lost and simply hadn't been told yet. What they did not know was that the pen she was holding cost more than Hartwell's shoes. What they did not know was that the hotel she was staying in was not a Marriott or a Holiday Inn. It was a suite she kept under a numbered holding company, registered in British Columbia, that she had never mentioned to Preston in 5 years of marriage. What they did not know was that the woman who looked like she couldn't afford a printer had, in the past 72 hours, quietly completed the acquisition of the largest private architectural firm in Ontario. The firm that had designed Preston's office building. The firm that currently held the lease on the studio space his new gallery occupied. But none of that mattered yet. What mattered right now was the courtroom and the judge and the way Preston's lawyer was already on his feet. "Your Honor," Hartwell said, spreading his hands like a man offering a gift, "my client has been more than reasonable. He is prepared to offer Ms. Okonkwo a settlement of $12,000 and 60 days to vacate the matrimonial home. This generosity is not something she has earned. The record will show that Miss Okonkwo contributed no documented income to this marriage for the past 4 years. She has no verifiable assets. She filed her financial disclosure by hand." He paused to let that land, by hand, on a legal pad. Adeora did not look up. "My client," Hartwell continued, warming to it now, "built his gallery from the ground up. He cultivated the relationships, he secured the investors, he developed the brand. Ms. Okonkwo benefited from his success while contributing nothing substantive of her own. She is, with respect, seeking to profit from a life she did not build." There was a murmur in the gallery. Someone behind Preston made a small approving noise. The judge looked at Adeora over his glasses. He was not unkind, but he was a man who had seen 100 of these cases and could read a balance sheet faster than he could read a room. "Mrs. Okonkwo, do you wish to respond?" Adeora looked up. Her eyes were dark and very steady. "I do, Your Honor, but I'd like to request 5 minutes before I present my documentation." Hartwell scoffed. "Your Honor, this is a delay tactic. She has no documentation." "I have documentation," Adora said quietly. "I just want to make sure the people who are delivering it have arrived in the building." The judge frowned. "I beg your pardon?" "They're here," said a voice from the back of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors had opened. 3 people walked in. Not lawyers in the conventional sense, or not only that. The woman leading them was in her late 50s, with silver-streaked locks and a posture that suggested she had never once, in her life, been hurried by another person. She wore a charcoal suit and no jewelry except for a single ring on her right hand that, if you knew what to look for, you would recognize as a Companions of the Order of Canada medal, repurposed. Her name was Vivienne Addo, and she was the founding partner of Addo, Reyes & Strand, a firm that did not take divorce cases. It handled mergers, international acquisitions, and the occasional matter that touched the offices of the federal government. "Who are these people?" the judge said, with the tone of a man who ran a tight courtroom and intended to keep doing so. Vivienne Addo walked directly to Adeora's table, placed a leather portfolio in front of her, and turned to face the bench. "Apologies for the interruption, Your Honor. Vivienne Addo, Addo Reyes & Strand. I'm not here in a capacity related to the divorce proceeding. I represent Meridian Holdings, the parent company of Wild Creative Group." She nodded in Preston's direction, very briefly, as though acknowledging a minor detail. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, Meridian has completed the purchase of the outstanding commercial debt on Mr. Wile's gallery space, and holds a controlling interest in the property management company that administers his studio lease in the Distillery District." Preston stood up so fast his chair scraped. That's not, Hartwell, what is she talking about?" Hartwell had gone the specific shade of pale that expensive lawyers go when they realize they have walked into a room without knowing what was in it. "Mr. Weil," the judge said sharply, "sit down." Preston sat. But his eyes were on Adora, and for the first time since the proceeding had begun, he was not smiling. Adora opened the leather portfolio in front of her. She did not rush. She turned the pages with the deliberate patience of a woman who had rehearsed nothing because she did not need to. "Your Honor," she said, "I'd like to submit several items into evidence. The first is the original incorporation record for Meridian Holdings dated 11 years ago. My name is on the founding documents." She slid it to the clerk. "The second is a valuation report, completed last week, placing Meridian's asset portfolio at approximately $240 million. Cassidy, in the gallery, made a small sound that was not quite a word. "The third," Adora continued, "is a record of the intellectual property contribution I made to Weil Creative Group during the marriage. Specifically, the curatorial framework that Mr. Weil used to attract his first 3 institutional investors. I wrote it. I have the original drafts, dated, and the email thread in which Preston sent it to his investors under his own signature." She paused. "I didn't object at the time because I was trying to help him succeed. I was under the impression we were building something together." The room had gone completely still. Preston's jaw was tight. The muscle in his cheek moved. He leaned toward Hartwell and hissed something that Hartwell did not respond to, because Hartwell was reading the valuation report that the clerk had passed to the bench and then, after the judge's small nod, passed to opposing counsel. "This can't be right," Preston said, loudly enough for the whole room to hear. "She's been sleeping at a hotel. She was buying groceries with a Visa debit. I've seen her bank statements." "You've seen one of my bank statements," Adora said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "The account I kept for household expenses. Preston, you froze that account 6 months ago. You did it because you thought it was the only money I had." She tilted her head slightly. "It was not the only money I had." Hartwell finally found his voice. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a recess to review these documents." "I imagine you would," the judge said, in a tone that suggested he found the entire morning more interesting than he'd expected. He looked at the valuation report. He looked at Adora. He looked at the incorporation documents. He set them down. "Miss Okonkwo, I want to be very clear about what I'm looking at. You are telling this court that you are the beneficial owner of a private holding company worth." He checked the number, $240 million, "and that you did not disclose this during the marriage?" "I disclosed it to my lawyer 4 days ago," Adora said. "I did not disclose it to Preston. The company was established before the marriage, held in trust through a numbered entity, and managed entirely separately from any marital finances. My family law counsel has confirmed this structure falls outside the definition of net family property under the Family Law Act." "Your family law counsel," Hartwell said, looking around the room, "is not present." "No," Adora agreed, "but Vivian Addo is, and she can speak to the corporate structure if the court finds it helpful." Vivienne, who had been standing beside the table with the stillness of a woman who had testified before parliamentary committees, inclined her head. "Happy to, Your Honor." The judge rubbed the bridge of his nose. He was recalibrating. You could watch him doing it. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm going to grant that recess. But I want to be direct with you. The picture of this case that you painted for this court 20 minutes ago and the picture that is currently on this table are not the same picture. I expect that when we reconvene, your client's position will reflect the updated landscape." Hartwell nodded very quickly. Preston said, "She manipulated." "Mr. Weil." The judge's voice was final. "Not now." The gavel came down. The hallway outside courtroom 7 smelled like coffee from the Tim Hortons cart at the end of the corridor and the particular institutional cleaning solution used in every provincial courthouse in Ontario. Adora stood near a window and looked out at the street below. November in Toronto. The trees had dropped everything. The sky was the color of old dishwater. Vivienne stood beside her. "He's already on the phone," she said. "He's trying to find someone who can tell him this isn't happening." "Let him," Adora said. "There's no one to find. How are you feeling?" Adora was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about the night he told me I was financially illiterate," she said. "We're sitting at the kitchen table. I had made dinner. He had a glass of wine and he said," she stopped. Started again. "He said, Adora, you've never understood money. You've never understood how the world actually works. That's why you need me." She looked at the street. He believed it. That's the thing. He wasn't saying it to be cruel. He genuinely believed it. Vivienne said nothing. She was a woman who knew when silence was the correct response. "I let him believe it," Adora said, "because I wanted to know if he was a good man underneath all of it. I wanted to know if he would treat me well even when he thought I had nothing. If he would be kind to me when he was sure he held all the cards. She turned away from the window. He was not kind. No, Vivienne agreed, he was not. Adaora picked up her yellow notepad. Then let's go finish this. The recess lasted 45 minutes. When they reconvened, Hartwell looked like a man who had been deflated in a specific and targeted way. Preston had loosened his tie. The confident sprawl was gone. He was sitting forward, elbows on the table, and he was looking at Adaora with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was not anger. It was something more animal than that. It was the look of a person who had just realized, for the first time, that the ground beneath them was not ground at all. The settlement that Hartwell proposed in the revised proceedings was substantially different from the first one. There was no mention of $12,000. There was no mention of vacating the matrimonial home. Adaora's family law counsel, a woman named Elspeth Corda, who had driven directly from a meeting in Markham and arrived with 4 minutes to spare, listened to the new numbers and then asked for them to be adjusted upward by 30%, which they were. Preston said, at one point, "This is not who she is. You don't know her. This is not. She used to teach kids to paint on Saturday mornings. She made soup for the neighbors when they were sick. She is not this person." Elspeth said calmly, "Those things are not mutually exclusive." Preston looked at Adaora as though looking at her through glad it known was there. "Why?" he said. "Why didn't you just? If you had all of this, why were you living like?" He gestured vaguely at her blazer, her notepad, her singularly unbothered expression. "Why did you let them laugh at you?" Adaora looked at him for a long moment. "Because I needed to know," she said, "and now I do." She turned back to Elspeth. "Where were we?" They wrapped at 2:30. The gavel came down for the last time, and Adaora walked out of courtroom 7 into the gray Toronto afternoon with nothing left unfinished in that room. She did not go home, she went to the office. Meridian Holdings occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower at the corner of Bay and Adelaide. It did not have a sign on the building directory. It did not need one. The people who needed to know it was there already knew. The receptionist, a young man named Kofi who had worked for Adaora for 3 years and had never once called her anything other than Miss Okonkwo unless she specifically told him to, looked up when she came through the glass doors. He took in the Value Village blazer, the yellow notepad, the slight loosening around her eyes that meant the day had been long. He did not ask how it went. "The Larimer file is on your desk," he said. "Vivienne is in the boardroom, and someone dropped off a plant." Adaora looked at the small green thing on the reception desk. "Who?" "Didn't say. Card just says congratulations." She picked up the card. The handwriting was her mother's. Of course it was. Adaora's mother, Ngozi, was 71 years old and lived in a semi-detached house in Scarborough that she had bought with her own money in 1991 when she arrived in Toronto with 2 suitcases and the particular stubbornness of a woman who has decided to be underestimated for the last time. She had worked as a hospital administrator for 30 years. She had raised 2 daughters on a single income and made it look manageable. She had met Preston once, at a Christmas dinner 4 years ago, and said only, afterwards in Igbo, "He talks about himself the way a small lake talks about being an ocean." Adaora had thought, at the time, that her mother was being unfair. She had since revised that assessment. She called her mother from the elevator. "I see you sent a plant." "I sent a plant because flowers die," her mother said. "A plant is a commitment." "How did it go?" "It went." Did he understand at the end? Adaora leaned against the elevator wall. The doors opened on the 31st floor. "I don't think so, not really. He's still trying to make sense of it." "He will never make sense of it," Ngozi said without cruelty. "Because to make sense of it, he would have to first accept that he never actually knew you. And that is not something a man like Preston Weil is built to accept." "Mama, yes? Thank you for the plant. Don't kill it. Water it on Wednesdays." Adaora was smiling when she walked into the boardroom. Vivienne was there with 2 members of the Meridian team. A corporate analyst named Brecken, who was 26 and had the relentless focus of someone who had been waiting their whole life for something real to work on, and a senior advisor named Constance, who had worked with Adaora since the beginning, and who had been, more than once, the only other person in the room who understood what they were actually building. "The Larimer deal closes Friday," Constance said, not looking up from her laptop. "The financing is confirmed. The partners have signed. We just need your counter-signature. I'll do it tonight. And the Weil Gallery lease," Vivienne said. "Do you want to accelerate the timeline on that?" Adaora sat down at the head of the table. She thought about Preston's face when Vivienne had said the word Meridian in the courtroom, the specific way the color had left it. "No," she said, "we're not accelerating it." She folded her hands on the table. "We're going to run it the way we run everything. Clean, professional, fair. He'll get the standard notice. 45 days. Constance looked up. That's more than he gave you. Yes, Adora said. It is. She opened the Larimer file. That's the point. The 45 days played out the way business played out when it was managed correctly. With paperwork and phone calls and meetings that Preston was not invited to, and could not have understood even if he had been. The gallery space went on the market. An offer came in from a collective of Indigenous artists from Northern Ontario who had been looking for a permanent home in the city. The rent they were offered was 40% below market rate. That was Adora's instruction. Preston found out from a mutual acquaintance who had seen the listing. He called her once. She did not answer. He sent a text that read, "This is not you, I know you. You are not this person." She read it, set her phone down and went back to the Larimer file. 2 weeks later, she was in a meeting with representatives from a federal infrastructure fund when her assistant knocked and passed her a note. It said, "Preston Weil outside. No appointment. Says it's urgent." Adora looked at the note, looked at the people sitting around the table. "Give me 2 minutes," she said. She found Preston in the reception area. He had lost weight. His jacket did not fit the way it used to. He was not wearing the watch she had given him for their 3rd anniversary, which meant he had sold it or hawked it, or it was in a drawer somewhere with things he did not look at anymore. "You didn't have to take the space," he said. "That was a direct hit at me. That was personal." "I took the space," Adora said, "because it was a sensible acquisition. What I do with it is entirely a business decision. Artists who can't pay market rent, artists who will create something lasting in that space, yes." He looked at her. He looked at the office behind her, the glass walls and the quiet controlled energy of people who were good at their work. He looked at Kofi at the reception desk. He looked at the small green plant, which was, she was relieved to note, still alive. "I didn't know," Preston said. "You have to understand that. I didn't know any of this existed." "I know you didn't. Why didn't you tell me?" Adora was quiet for a moment. The question deserved a real answer and she had been deciding for weeks whether she would ever give him one. "Because I grew up watching my mother work herself into the ground," she finally said, "and every man she worked beside took her ideas, her labor and her time, and called it their success. I built Meridian by myself with my own money and my own mind, and I protected it with everything I had. Not because I was hiding it from you specifically." She paused. "But because I had learned that when you show people what you have, they stop seeing what you are. They just see the asset." Preston absorbed this. "Is that what I did? You told me I was financially illiterate, Preston. At our kitchen table. While I was building a $240 million company." She said it without heat. "So yes, that is what you did." He didn't have anything to put against that. He stood there for a moment, holding a silence that was the shape of 5 years of marriage, and then he said very quietly, "I'm sorry, Adora." "I know," she said, and she meant it. It simply did not change anything. She walked him to the elevator. She waited until the doors closed. She stood there for 3 seconds in the particular silence that follows the end of something, and then she turned around and went back to her meeting. By spring, the Indigenous Arts Collective had repainted the gallery space. There was a mural on the exterior wall, vivid against the brick, that you could see from the street. Adora drove past it once on her way to a meeting. She didn't stop, but she saw it, and she noted privately that the building looked better than it had in years. The Larimer deal closed at a number that made the business section of the Globe and Mail. Meridian's name was in the 3rd paragraph. Adora's name was not in the article at all, which was exactly how she had arranged it. Preston's gallery relocated to a smaller space in Leslieville. She heard this from Vivienne, who had heard it from Marsensenso. He was by all accounts managing. The work he was showing was better than it had been. Smaller scale, more personal. Perhaps, she thought, without the pressure of her money flowing invisibly through the walls, he was finally making art for the right reasons. She hoped so. She found that she genuinely hoped so. Cassidy was not, as far as anyone knew, still in the picture. On a Thursday in April, Adora sat at her desk at the end of a long day and opened the bottom drawer where she kept things she was not ready to throw away. There was a photograph from the Value Village on Dundas. She had taken it on her phone the day she'd bought the blazer. A silly impulse, a memento for herself. She in the 2 bright lights of the changing room, the gray blazer on her shoulders, looking at herself in the mirror with an expression that was not sad or afraid or beaten, but rather simply watchful. Like a woman taking inventory. She looked at it for a moment, then she closed the drawer. "Kofi," she said, pressing the intercom. "Is the car downstairs, waiting at the curb, Miss Okonk, and my mother's birthday dinner? Reservation at 7:30. Canoe, they've confirmed the private room. Good." She stood up and pulled on her coat, not the Value Village blazer, but a camel wool coat she had owned for years, cut precisely, worn soft. "Tell the team they can go home." We'll pick up the Larimer follow-up in the morning. Yes, ma'am. She took the elevator down, walked through the lobby, pushed through the glass doors into the cool April evening, where the city was doing what Toronto always did in spring. Shedding the last of its gray and beginning cautiously to believe in color again. The car was there. The driver held the door. Adaora got in and she did not look back at the building, because she had stopped needing to. What was behind her was built. What was ahead of her was the point. Her mother was waiting. There was wine to open and food to eat, and a story to tell. The real one, the whole one, the version her mother already knew in its bones because she had handed Adaora the first chapter herself, 30 years ago, in a semi-detached in Scarborough. The car pulled into traffic and the city moved around her, and Adora Okonkwo was at last entirely herself.